Hi, I'm Pete Shau. You may know me from the RTO Show podcast, but today I'm doing something a little bit different. APRo and Wow Brands have launched a special project to bring the story of our industry to life like never before. They've asked me to sit down with some of the true legends of rent-to-own, capturing their stories, their impact, and their vision for the future. And now I get to share those conversations with you straight from the legends themselves. All of this leads to something groundbreaking, though. A new book, The Rent-to-Own Revolution, A Definitive History of Advocacy and Consumer Access, written by APRo CEO Charles Smitherman and Wow Brand CEO Brian Krast. The book explores the grassroots of RTO, the advocacy that has defined it, and the future that we're building together. Here's where you come in. We're giving away free copies once the book is released. Just head over to the RTORevolution.com and sign up for a chance to receive a copy in early 2026. Don't miss the chance to be among the first to hold this piece of RTO history. That's RTORevolution.com. Check it out and become a part of RTO history. Hello and welcome to the RTO Show. I'm your host, Pete Shau, and today I am talking to the man, John Blair. He is one of the legends in our Legend series, and I think when I say this, he's one of the top dogs on the Legend series. He's been there, done that, and he's done it for quite a while. With a history like that, John, I'm going to let you explain it. What a time to talk about. John Blair, how you doing today? How's everything going?
I'm doing great, man. Doing really good. Yeah, first of all, like Pete, I really want to say, to all the people out there in the rent-to-own industry, I really miss you guys. But yeah, I tell you what, I've been blessed to be part of the rent-to-own industry, and my family's doing good, and my 4 grandkids doing good. So I'm doing good. Everything's going well. I really miss it, but then again, I've got a lot going on right now too. But I appreciate, I want to shout out to the TRIB group members and say how much I appreciated them for the last 14 years, and especially Dennis Shields for being such a great friend, and the majority of the people on the board of TRIB and the TRIB members alone that are still there and still doing well. I really appreciate it, and I just want to say thank you so much for all that you've done for me and my family.
Well, I know that they appreciate all the work that you've done in your years that you were around, a lot of guidance that you gave. But let's go back a little bit. You and I have had some talks in the green room about your early years, and you had a crazy upbringing. You kind of did a couple things, and then you went to the military. You had a solid career there, and you decided, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. And then you land in the RTO industry arena. So let's go back just a little bit. How did you start, and what happened? How'd you get into the military?
Well, my father died when I was 16. He was a retired officer in the Army. They both buried out at Fort Benning, Georgia, and my parents are. And he died when I was 16. I was a junior in high school, and I really just had no guidance, and my life wasn't going anywhere. I tried a couple of years of college part-time and working. I had to work, that was the only way I'd get by. But when you're out there and single, and to make a long story short, I got in a little bit of trouble, and I just, it caused my mother a lot of burden. And I just said, I left work one afternoon and drove by the recruiting depot, and I just stopped there in front and said, and I had a really pretty good job, and and I said, I just walked in and say, I'd like to join the Marine Corps, and that was history. In '66, I knew I was going to go to Vietnam. I was a grunt, a rifleman, and everything, and so I spent my first 10 months in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Naval Air Station there, and then they shipped me off to Vietnam in late October '67 to all of '68. And I came back, was a DI at Parris Island. Then I worked as a platoon sergeant up in Washington, D.C., which I love. So if it hadn't been for the Vietnam War, I know I'd have still stayed in. But it gave me purpose in life, loyalty, dedication, and it turned my life around. I think every young man, if they're not having anything to do right now, they don't know what decision they're going to make, and they don't want to live with their parents, they just should go into service. It's a great eye opener. You get to meet a lot of different people, see a lot of different things. So I'm very pleased that I joined the Marine Corps. I have no doubt in my mind about that.
I want to say first and foremost, thank you for your service. I know that, we hadn't talked about that too much in the previous conversations, but let me say that thank you for your service and what you've done for the country.
Yeah, I'm
sure.
I was asked, we got all the services celebrating 250 years, and I did a lot of speaking engagements, and so I'm the keynote speaker for the Marine Corps Ball this year here in Atlanta area. So I'm really pleased about that.
All
But
right. Well, congratulations.
yeah, yeah, it's quite an honor. I've been working on the speech for a long time. I keep it kind of light. Got to keep it 20 minutes too. So, but I do that and certain things like that. I do it in memorial centers and national cemeteries, stuff like. So I enjoy doing stuff like that, working with veterans and talking about my career and so on. But after I got back from the Marine Corps, I had to rent furniture. So I went to Roy Hill Furniture Rental, rented some furniture, and I didn't know anything about furniture rentals, and they just opened up in Atlanta, and I moved to Atlanta to live with a buddy of mine. And when I was in Atlanta, I was right there, and owner of one of the vice presidents came into town. And he says, I'm looking for somebody to manage a store in Atlanta. It was downtown Atlanta, Buckhead area. And I said, well, I got a good friend of mine that would like to manage it, might come up here and live with me. And when he came up, he says, I can't leave down where I'm at. And so I just went in and said, I don't know a damn thing about furniture, lamps, but I'll give you 110% if that's what you want. And that's where I got started in the career. And, down the road, Ken Butler and I became good friends because he was with Aaron's at the time, Aaron's Furniture Rental at the time. And so we kind of got to know each other and both stayed in the industry a long time. And then when Broy Hill sold, I was up in Nashville, Tennessee, and Lowry Schrader, who was one of the chairman of TRIB Group at the time, they'd been in business maybe a year and a half, asked me if I would come down and interview for the job. And I said, well, what's the rental industry, like that? And he told me, well, we rent furniture, come by, and they had about 1,500 square feet. And I said, what you rent furniture for? You rent a bedroom suite for what I rent a one-bedroom apartment for. I said, man, y'all are charging some great prices, And so anyway, to make a long story short, I think TRIB Group hired me as their first executive director because of my furniture rental background. I told them you need to get at least 4,000 square feet of the showroom space so you can have the furniture. And that's kind of the way it all started, so I was really impressed with the board of directors then. I think we only had like 17 members, and they handed me a box of accounts and said, go find an office and everything else. And they said they guarantee my salary. I was hesitant on taking a job because they really didn't have any income coming in. So I had my first convention in Marriott, and I charged like $425 a booth space or something like that. And I had like 30 vendors come, and we only had 17 members. And after that, and I had them in different rooms downstairs. I didn't have it was at Marriott, different rooms. They walk around. They said, don't you have any more people here? And I said, well, this is it. And we probably, 2 or 3 of them only bought merchandise. So vendors were very upset and put out a lot of fires. But we started growing and getting little by little. And then when Slats came on board, Norman Slatt and the buddies came on board, he was really one that really started everything going really well. He was one of our largest, franchises. And when he went around with me to the furniture market, to Tupelo, and he would actually buy merchandise from the vendors. So it gave us a lot of trustworthy among the vendors and the TRIB group. And the Slats would go to the conventions and grab people in and say, you need to join TRIB and stuff like that. So he really helped grow the growth of TRIB. And then Daryl Tissett came along after Slats, and of course somebody else did. But Daryl Tissett and Lowry and Norman Slatt were probably the ones that really kind of got TRIB together. Daryl was more professional, got us involved with this and the county and stuff. Cynthia Baber was one. The Babers, she was there. Just to name a few that are still around that helped her a lot. And so we started growing then, we started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and our conventions got bigger, and we TRIB became a name to be dealt with out there, so that was part of the industry that I love. Plus the camaraderie with the guys was just amazing. I think some of the biggest success of TRIB we'd have what we call our meetings of the minds. At the time we started, we'd basically go to a little resort area, and we'd actually take a easel and throw up a pad and say, okay, what do y'all want to talk about? And they talk about salaries. They want to talk about, what are you charging this for? do I have to do this legally? Well, so the gathering information really built the TRIB group, because people would gladly, they would call me and say, John, do you know any of the members that have done this or done that? And I say, yes, I do, and I'd say, oh, here's one. They'd say, and they're saving money legal wise. Say, you don't have to do that. You have to do this. So the camaraderie was there, and it just really grew. When Slats came on board, I call him Slats, Norman Slats, it's buddies. He said, what can I do for you? When I was executive director, and the main thing I wanted to do was have committees for furniture, appliance, electronics, and service, because I was making the decisions at the time on who we would be a vendor and who would not be a vendor. And a lot of vendors some of the vendors, not a lot, would say, why aren't you taking up mine or whatever? So once we made one of the board members chairman of one of the furniture committees or one of the appliance committees, and maybe had 2 members to serve on the committee, which is like 4 of us, the decisions were made as a group. So if a vendor got turned down, it wasn't because John Blair turned it down, it's because the committee turned it down because the program was not good enough. And then we decided to,
Hey, John, who was on those committees? Like when you created these committees at first, who was on these committees, and what kind of different committees did we have?
You're talking about in the 80s, so you're talking about David Blevins, Lowry wasn't on it, Slats, Daryl Tissett, even most of them, they go back so long. Some probably Cynthia Baber was on the committee, and Dennis Shields was one of the vice presidents of TRIB at the time, and he was on the committee, and Paul Barubian. They would just chair it, and then members that were members, the franchise, we'd ask them if they want to be on the committees, and we had no problem with volunteers. We pick up 2 members where you can be on the appliance, furniture, electronic committee, and 3 of us would get together, 4 of us, including myself. And we started setting up meetings in Atlanta area where they would come in, and we'd set up time and dates like they do now. We present their program to us, and then we go back and after they're gone, inform them whether we voted to have them in or not to have them in, And even every year they're required to do that, and we have to vote whether they should stay as a vendor. If they're not doing 30% of the TRIB members' business, then maybe that product's really not the best for the member. That's the way. I don't know how it is now because I've been away from it so long, but that's kind of the way we started. I kind of instigated the idea of like, why don't we all wear the same colored shirts when we go to APRo? So, and we found out, well, we're a huge part of APRo. The TRIB members are, when you walk around and see all red shirts or all blue shirts or whatever on the day, you realize he was a TRIB member. So it really brought a lot of, to the TRIB group, and so we just grew and grew and grew. And then we kind of partnered up with APRo to grow the industry alone, and to make it all in one. And so everybody works closely together, APRo and TRIB, and even Nationwide at the time. And so the industry has been very sharp and very growing. I'm very pleased the way the direction of the industry went. And they still have that in the industry. They still have the camaraderie. The people are still friends. I get calls all the time from different, TRIB members saying, how you doing, and things like that. So it really means a lot to me, so it was a great industry, so, and I'm still proud of them. I think the rent-to-own industry will be here forever. There's just no doubt. I think it's one of the strongest industries around, because not only did they do that, they do a lot of charitable work, and when we started the rebates years ago, that was really great. It just shows how solid we were. I remember one instance, I don't know, was in the early 80s or mid 80s. Slats was president. When he was president, Phillips Corporation at the time, I would negotiate the rebates. I'd go and say, if we do $2 million, members get a 2% rebate, and we came up and we did like 1,988,000 or something like that, 1,900,000, or pretty close to only like 50,000 short. So when they came to the meeting, we were at the Marriott downtown Atlanta, and I forgot the gentleman's name who was in charge of Phillips at the time, came in and said we weren't going to get the rebate because we missed it by about $50,000. So Slat said, well, that's BS, and we should get it. We were loyal to you. And so he said, we got together and we said, we're just going to bypass that booth when all the members would not order from Phillips. And so we walked around the show, and Phillips, the salesmen, are standing there at a big booth, and they finally called me and said, why aren't anybody stopping by and buying from Phillips? Well, we felt we did a hell of a job. We did a lot of members switched to you, and we thought, that we deserved that 2% rebate, and we just felt that if you weren't willing to for less than $50,000 to meet the quota to give us a 2% rebate. We just didn't feel it's worth buying your product anymore. You know, like that. And all of a sudden they came back and said, we'll go ahead and give it to you. Give us a really a good deal, had some specials and everything. So that just shows you the solidarity of the TRIB group and the members at the time. That really meant a lot. And I think that really made an impression on the other vendors that were at the show when they found out, well, they're just bypassing Phillips. We're buying from Zenith, we're buying from RCA, but we're not buying from Phillips, you know, at the time. So that was a proud moment to me with TRIB Group.
Whose idea was it to come up with the idea? Where did the idea come from to get rebates from the vendors in order to entice some of the dealers to buy from them?
Gosh, I don't know. We did it as a board. The TRIB board members came up with it. I don't know who came up with it. It was Slats or one of the board members brought it up. I can't remember, but it was brought up at a board meeting that if we could do this volume of business, that we should get it. Of course, we knew at the time, you could tell at the time that if we did something like that, we knew we'd have to really work hard on the pricing because they were going to increase the pricing 2% when they hand us a new pricing to cover the rebates that we possibly would get to them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the funny story was we had I forgot what company it was at the time. There's a company out in I think it was Bestway at the time. And Gary Jones was the buyer for Bestway. That's what it was. And Gary Jones was the buyer. And Gary Jones says, I'm going to join TRIB, but I'm not joining until the first of the year. And I said, well, who you do a lot of business with? And they said, we do a lot of business with Ashley. We really do a couple $1 million with Ashley. I said, well, okay, good. So I put that in my book. So when we went out to visit Ashley and talked about the program, they said, well, if you do $4 million, we'll give you a 3% rebate or something like that. I can't remember what it was. So I kept in mind, well, okay, what if we can do $5 million? Will you give us a 4% rebate? They said, yeah, we'll do that if you can do $5 million, because we might only been doing $2 million that year, you know, the year before. But I knew from when Gary Jones came on that I was going to actually get another $2 million, so we were going to get a 4% rebate. So I remember going to High Point, and Ron Walnick said, I need the things that, John, you need to come see Ron Walnick at the Ashley building, you know, at the Ashley's office in High Point. So I went down to sitting there with Ron Walnick, and I'm sitting there, and he says, and he's got his president there, and he says, you know, he pulls his chair around his desk, he sits in front and says, we don't give rebates, you know, like that, you know. And I said, what do you mean you don't give rebates? He says, you're going to do $5 million this year, and we're going to have to give 4% rebate. That's a lot of money and we just don't do that, you know. And I said, well, you signed a contract to do this. What do you mean I signed a contract? His president signed I had the contract, but I pulled it out and said, you signed the contract here. I'm going to have to show this to the board of directors because we're going to reach, you will know it's 4% rebate. And he says, can I make a copy of this? I said, absolutely. And I gave him the copy, and I put mine back in there, and I went back to the board, and first thing you know, we got a call, we'll honor it. You know, that's the way Ashley is. They will honor that. But it's kind of something that I used at the time, you know, when I was director of TRIB. You know, I just knew Gary was coming in with $2 million. Well, we're going to make 4%, you know, so I'll work out a better deal. But we negotiated as you know, there'd always be, when I'd go to High Point or go to Tupelo, Mississippi, there was always like Slats or the president would always go with me, and a couple of other board of directors would always go there. We'd go to CES, and they'd all go together, and we'd go around together and work as a team, which really brought a lot to the TRIB group then. Just terrific industry. So that's kind of the way we got started.
As you're going through TRIB and you're growing TRIB, how well did TRIB grow in those 14 years that you were executive director?
Well, when I left them, when I started, we only had 17 members and maybe 115 stores or something like that. So you can imagine, and those are, and the majority of the stores had Slats had it, and then we had another company that came on board that was a big franchise deal. I can't remember the name of it, but no longer in business. They had 50, and that really brought it to us. But I don't even know what it is right now. I have no idea what TRIB is right now. You know, it's just a great industry, and you know, to me, I think I can't see why one dealer would not be a member of the TRIB group. I really can't. I can't see why they wouldn't be. I mean, it's not that much to join, you know, and you get your money back immediately on one vendor, one program or one product. You can get if you purchase it, the majority purchase, you get your money back. But I think the real value of TRIB is that the camaraderie, being able to say, negotiate with other members on certain things, or talk about with feel freely, like I could really feel free to call Pete. Pete, you've been doing this for years. I've got this problem. What do you think you did? Or what are you paying for this? Or what are you paying for that? I remember when the pricing really got tough, I went around to Walmart and to Walmart and Kmart and all those stores, and the furniture stores. And I would go around with the yellow pad and I'd write down some of the numbers that we'd done and see what they're offering retail. And I'd put it up on a big board. And so when the board members come in for a vendor meeting, I could see what the pricing is compared. Then we kind of had an idea what we're going to do then. But it's just a great organization. There's just so many positives about the TRIB group. And plus, with the way APRo has come together with TRIB, even makes it much more nicer. At the time when I was going through that, there was a little ill feelings between TRIB and APRo. At one time, APRo was actually flew into Atlanta to think about purchasing TRIB, and this was in the early. Slats was president then. I remember that because he was president at the time, and Daryl was on the board, and they had a lot to say so about it, and it was at the airport. And we, of course, the members voted it down because APRo wanted to knew that we were getting these rebates and it could help finance them. But they support everybody, so it's just, things have really changed in the long run, especially with technology. I remember we had a guy from Slats or Daryl recommended come in and set up our computers in the office and redo everything and put all these ways we could asset whatever we were doing, what each member was paying. It meant a lot to us at that time. So technology really helped the growth of TRIB also.
When you're talking about those time frames, because you're talking about the 14 years and the changeover, what do you think as it is now, how do you feel the relationship is between TRIB and APRo now that it's kind of progressed from that point on to now? Hey everyone, it's Pete Shau here from the RTO Show podcast, and I want to tell you about a company that's making a real difference in the rent-to-own space, Wow Brands. I've seen firsthand how they approach marketing, and let me tell you, it's not just about ads. Wow Brands builds complete digital ecosystems designed specifically for the rent-to-own industry. Their e-commerce and lead generation strategies are built to bring in qualified leads. And did I mention that they are actively working with the rent-to-own industry while also being members of APRo and TRIB? Listen, these folks are passionate problem solvers. They don't just slap something together. They design, build, and scale the kind of digital retail tools your business needs and your customers actually want. So if you're serious about growing, reach out to Wow Brands at wowbrands.com. I trust them, and I think you will too.
I think it's nothing but positive. APRo keeps the industry together because somebody goes up to Washington and takes a Charles Smitherman, very smart, very intelligent. I've known Charles for years, so happy he became APRo CEO. But I think that we need, TRIB members need APRo, the industry needs APRo. There's no doubt about it. APRo is there to make sure that we stay in business, and they keep us pretty much informed of what was going on. And we've always supported APRo. I mean, that was on the big. I remember us giving money to APRo when we were managing our funds. We'd give $2,500 to APRo, whatever. APRo's always been solid with the TRIB members. I think it's a great, terrific organization. Got great people running it. A lot of people that are on the board were on the TRIB board at one time.
I think it's a great organization. I think they work well together. Talking about going back a little bit earlier on, you were talking about some of the different vendors, whether it be RCA, Zenith, Ashley, whatever the case is. As you started, you said there was only a select few vendors that were there. How did you go about getting those vendors to come on to TRIB to be available with the rebates and what they do to the dealers?
Well, I think the way that all came on, now that didn't come on at once. It took time. It took the period of time. I think I'd say the first 7, 8, 10 years of TRIB was really a building the confidence of the vendors to build confidence that TRIB is a strong organization that's not going nowhere. And that took time. When we do our annual shows and everything, we would really honor the vendors and they'd see the honor of the vendors. And these things take time. And what Dennis has done is really just taking it to the next level, because Dennis to me is a very smart individual. And he takes it to the next level. And I think it just, I went as far as I could. I think I went with them, and then Dennis took over and just took it another step further. But it took time. I can't say it's when you go in and you show loyalty to the vendors, and the word got around that TRIB is loyal to the vendors. When they pick up somebody, they support the group. They buy the product from the group, and that's what it was all about. Is that if we picked up a vendor, we're going to buy their product. And even though when you're at the shows, I'm sure Dennis been through this. Some vendors that you have come up and they say, well, I'm not getting that much business. And I would always say in a very nice way, well, maybe your product is not for the rent-own industry. Maybe that's not what we need in the industry, because some vendors would have certain things, and we might have thought it was good and try it, and we don't most likely tell them, well, we'll give you a shot, but if it doesn't work out, and we feel if you're not going to do that amount of business with TRIB, then maybe the product is not there, for you, like that. And then I think the industry, the vendors got where they had so much confidence in the TRIB members that just carried on, and the word got out. Well, you need to be a TRIB vendor if you're going to grow this industry. You need to go see Dennis, and you need to see if it's worthwhile, and see if you can't get an appointment to see if your product's worthwhile having it. But you have to have a product that's going to appeal to the TRIB customers and everything else, and that's what the key is. And it's, to me, I've always said, keep it simple. If you just got to keep it simple. The pricing, the product, and everything, and offer only so many SKUs of it. Whoever thought purses would be a product that we would have? Whoever thought we'd sell lawnmowers? Whoever thought we'd sell this, or we thought we'd do that, or rent this or rent that? But those are what your customer needs. They need a grill. They need a lawnmower. And I remember going, and I visited a lot of TRIB members during my time. I remember going to Colorado, and it was American Furniture. I walked into their showroom one time, and they had everything. It was like a retail store. And in the middle of the store, they had gifts for the customer to purchase. And they were basically giving these small gifts away, but they were for the kids. And they had it right in the middle. And the parents would come in, they look, and they had it right in the middle. They were little cars, trucks, little radios, headphones, and they were selling them for whatever their cost is. And they're afraid about it. They didn't raise up the price. And the customers are just in there constantly. And then I remember going down to Louisiana, and during the season down there, and this one company had air conditioners just piled up, window air conditioners. And I'm saying, gosh, those are a lot of window air conditioners. He says, we can't keep them in, during the summertime. They would come in, and and then they'd wrap them up in plastic and store them for the next time over. Instead of just saying when they come back, they would clean them up and wrap them and store them, And even when cell phones started, I wouldn't believe you'd want to rent a cell phone. They were so expensive, but it's just a way for the customer cannot afford. They don't have the credit, in my opinion, to afford to go out and buy something retail and put it. They'd much rather rent it. Plus, it gives them the advantage, as in the industry, to return it without having any bad credit or anything else. And I think the families, like when somebody would rent it, they say, well, go here and rent it. I remember when my granddaughter went down to college, and she's a senior this year, and she's at Gainesville. She had an apartment, and she says, I don't know. I said, go to Buddy's right there. And of course, me knowing the people at Buddy's, they gave her a good package, and she was able to furnish her place. And so those things are plus to a lot of people. The way I got started in the industry, in the furniture rental industry, after I got out of the Marine Corps and moved up to Atlanta, I needed a bedroom suit, so I went by Aaron's and was getting me a bedroom suit, for like $15, until I worked for Broyle, and then I'd get for free. But it's a great industry, so, and you meet a lot of great people. That's the most important thing, is the people in the industry are just so nice, so giving, and you meet a lot of great vendor friends. I got a lot of good vendor friends, and that's why I just thoroughly enjoyed the industry so much. I'm really blessed.
Well, you did 14 years as TRIB's executive director, but then you got out, and that wasn't the end of your RTO career.
No.
So
no.
What made you, what came to the idea that maybe it's time to leave TRIB and move on? And then where did you go from there?
Well, I went to work for Jerry Bogo Jewelry Company. That's where I met Robbie. Okay. Robbie and I have been friends. We talk to each other just about every day.
We're talking about Robbie Tyson.
Yeah, Robbie Tice been friend for years, Kevin Silvers and all those guys. So at that time, believe it or not, at that time, we were doing a tremendous amount of business in jewelry. And so I just knew at this time, it was my time I felt that I could make more money in sales, and which I did. Nothing wrong with what TRIB was paying me. They paid me a good salary, but I needed to. It's a financial reason. That's the reason I left it, strictly financial, and that's the only reason. I really missed it, but I was loyal, and I left TRIB on a very high note, and so proud I did. And at one time when they had to hire the first director, they're talking about me coming back, and I just said I was just happy with what I was doing and the amount of money I was making at the time. So that's the reason I left and stayed with Robbie for several years and selling and doing really just an independent salesman, with them. And I handled a few other lines of products too when I was with when I was after I left TRIB. So I was happy at that time. But I stayed. What was joy about it? I stayed with close camaraderie with all the TRIB members. So it was easy for me to sell because I already had established my relationship with the TRIB members, and a lot of them came on board and purchased from me and helped me and increase the business. And that's the way I made money.
Did you see a lot of changes with TRIB after you left?
I think the main thing that I think was, and Dennis came up with that idea, is the hot show. The hot show had to be, it's probably one of the key things that we ever did. When we were with TRIB, when I was at TRIB, we approached taking one product and do a quantity buy and buy all of them out. But at that time, you just couldn't get all the members to commit to buy that amount of product. Like say if Ashley came up and said, look, I got these bedroom suits or RCA or Zenith, or somebody came up and said, I've got, or Rourke would come up and say, Rourke wasn't with me at the time, but Rourke come up and say, I've got, 500 stereos or 2,000 stereos I need to move at this price. Could you buy them? I don't think we were at the time where we could actually do that at the time, because the industry was starting to change. When Borg Warner, a lot of people know who Borg Warner is, when they started offering more money to the TRIB dealers, because of their finances, and they started, like, for instance, some of the members that I knew, they would say, I only need $100,000. Borg Warner's going to give me $500,000. It was tough trying to pay that revenue back if you're in the store. Instead of taking that money, should have just took 100. And really, it really damaged some of the TRIB members that had been there for a long time. But very few, not too many that did that. But I think it's put a reality on what was going on and the way that what Borg Warner did. And then they had their own stores and stuff. So they finally went away. But there was just a lot of crazy things going on through that time of the industry. So,
talking about changes and talking about things new, what were some of the advancements that you saw happen in the rent-to-own industry in your tenureship over the last few decades of rent-to-own? What were some of the things that you saw came in, changed the industry for the better? But what are some of the other things, and I wouldn't say just product, but as it was coming up, were there any huge changes that happened along with it that you could say, wow?
Furniture really grew when I was there. Furniture started being a 35% of their business. Furniture really grew. Appliances are always going to be there. Everybody needs appliances, and electronics. When the electronics really started changing, I remember the big boom boxes you put on your shoulder and walk around, and all the bells and whistles and all that came to light. And then all of a sudden that disappeared, and we started getting in, more of a I know contemporary look in electronics. But when you get to bedding, but I think the biggest thing, I don't know if Ashley did this or not, but when they started saying we can drop off a sofa, a chair, 2 lamps, and 2 end tables, instead of just taking in 20 bedroom suits, they were able to order in groupings that they can put on their showroom, or what they know that would really go. And I think that was a big success story on that. And in other words, instead of trying to bring in several different items in one truckload, the groupings really made a lot difference. And Bill French could probably tell you that. He's been there for years now. I'm so proud that he's he's still there and working
The
well.
great Bill French, he's been doing it for years and years.
Of course, you know, the big screen TVs and all this stuff that just came on, that's TV for flatter instead of the big heavy TVs that you had. I remember those big tank TVs that we used to rent. And I just said, I don't know who carried them out, but they better have a strong back to carry those TVs out. And so I think that the industry has grown, and technology has really made the difference in the industry. You know, the people on computers, laptops. Okay, if you want to talk about laptops, that's probably one of the biggest things that hit the industry more than anything else was laptop, because you had to have the internet and all that, everything else that was involved with technology. You know, that to me, that was a big, I think technology had to be the biggest part of the growth of everything, you know.
And so you said you were the first director of the TRIB group?
Special director. They had I can't even think of his name, but they really, the one of the co-founders, I can't remember his name, Lowry Schrader was one of them, but this other gentleman was one of them. You know, the name just passes my mind. He was involved with it, and but he was more or less one of the co-founders and the director. But they needed somebody to come in and management and set up these shows, and you know, somebody to professionally management, and my management skills brought that into the industry, and talking and doing the programs and setting them up. You know, it was a challenge. It really was a challenge at the time, you know, but it was well worth it, because, you know, and I really had no idea about even they had me come down to Atlanta and interview along with other people to interview for the job at the time. But when I sat there and was listening to these guys, and there must have been 9 of them there, you know, that were on the board or whatever. We used to have 11 board members or whatever, or 13, but at the time, just listen to their success stories and listen to I was so intrigued about it, you know. And I had to be honest with you, in the beginning, I'm thinking, you know, if there's some way financially I could get my own rent-to-own store, this is what I need to do, is listen to these guys, and then go find where I can get my own rent-to-own store. And I had that opportunity with Borg Warner, and I'm glad I didn't take it, but they came in there one time and offered me like 5 stores out of Macon, Georgia. And I lived up here in Atlanta area. And that was a drive, you know, 2-hour drive with the traffic to go down there. And they said, because of my background, basically with Broyhill, I was a vice president of sales and management. I was a manager. I managed like 27 locations, you know, and had 5 states, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama, you know, before Broyhill sold the furniture rental business. And I basically was interviewing with court and some other industries, and decided to take an opportunity with the rent to own, which I'm glad I did. But you know, that's been my background, the furniture rental background. I even at one time, Kim Butler offered me a job, and I just said I said no, I didn't really want to work in that area, you know. But it was just when I sitting there listening to talk to him, I'm thinking, boy, I need to get in this business, because at that time, you know, and a lot of members, they just mortgaged their house, and it cost them maybe $100,000 to get in rent-to-own business, and with the mortgage of the house and payments, and Borg Warren was loaning money, and they were going to give me like 98% financing, but my kids were in school, and I just couldn't drive all the way down there and back every day, you know, and I didn't want to move to Macon at that time, so I was comfortable where I lived. You know, you make decisions that you know, at that time you think it's best for the family, and that's what you do. And that's what I did. I have no regrets there at all. You know, matter of fact, I'm probably glad I didn't go with them. I'd probably be bankrupt and owe everybody money right now. You know,
so when you left TRIB and you went to the jewelry sector, how long did you stay there?
Only about 3 years, and 3 or 4 years, you know, and then jewelry went out. You know, it only lasted, it's going, you know, everything's up and down, but it went in, and people are doing jewelry now. Robbie Tyson's still into it, but it was huge at the time. You know, it was just huge, putting it. People wanted it that bad. But then the prices of gold, I think, caused the price of gold went up. That's what really, I think, caused it down for the rent-on jewelry business, because we were doing a lot of chains and different things there. And I was mainly making good money on commissions and stuff there. And so I was sitting at, you know, the business it was going under. What happened was it in 2000? No, let's see, when did I start with them? It was in 1998 or 2000 when everything dropped. You know, the market dropped. People weren't buying for it. So we had a big contract with one dealer over $500,000, which Robbie Tyson and I at the time were kind of independent, and we were going to do well, but everybody just said we're canceled. They'd rather have furniture appliance. They canceled all the jewelry orders. Everybody just canceled. There was a time when the market hit or whatever. I can't remember exactly when it was, but that was at the time it did it. It was it was probably, let's see, can't remember when I left TRIB in 99, I believe. So it was in the early 2000s when all that happened. And so I basically didn't have a job. I mean, I'd had a job, but I wasn't making any money. And I got a call from PTS, Benefit and Financial Services, and from Tony Farrell about taxes. And he lived in this company was in Calhoun, Georgia. And he called me up one day, and I didn't know who he was. And he says, this is Tony Farrell. I said, I got your name from somebody. And I said, I think your client is what we're doing in the rent-to-own business, And I said, doing taxes. And I said, well, I don't know anything about taxes. I said, I'll come up there and talk to you, not just to help him out. And I went up there, and he said, he had a tax. He was doing a lot of tax at finance office. He said, your customer is perfect for my business. And the rent-to-own business was doing taxes. There's several members were doing taxes big time. And I said, well, let me give you some people to call and talk to, like that, and he called Dennis, and he called, Bill at the time of APRo, and he called him, and they just said, if you want to know a lot about the business, you need to hire John, like that. So I went up there and I started talking to him. And I said, all right, I'll take a chance. And we worked out a contract and a deal, and I stayed with them. We did really well in the business, did very, very well with the tax business first 2 years. And I ended up staying with him, until he sold his company, his division that I was running at the time. He sold to Benefit Marketing Group,
So what role did you play in PTS?
I was their vice president of sales, PTS, of operations sales. I handled all the sales for his benefit program. Same thing that benefit marketing does. That's what I did. We were in competition with benefit marketing.
How long did you do that?
Well, I was with Tony, almost 14 years, I think. I was with him pretty good bit, with him from 2000. I left him in 2022. So I was with him, 2000. 4 or something like that. It was 2008 or something like that. Something I can't remember, at that time, and then I had a health problem. A health problem hit me, and that's what I'd probably still be with him, even though he sold. I'd probably still be in the industry. I worked for Benefit Market for about 6 months, but I was really not in very good shape at the time. I had, everything went to crap all of a sudden one year, and I had 5 back surgeries. I've been in the hospital for 37 days. I had a heart attack due to the back surgeries because I was under for 9 hours. They really reconstructed my whole back. I'm really blessed, and I was, on being in recovery for a long time. I had to go to PT for a long time, therapy. I was in therapy in the hospital in therapy for 3 weeks, and so but I'm in great health now. I'm probably in the best health I've been in years. That was, and then he sold it. So that's what happened after he sold. And I decided to, Brad Dennison and Susan and all those people are just terrific. They've all been very good, and I wish I'd have stayed with them. But at the time, my health wasn't that good, and I didn't even know. But to be honest, I didn't know if I was going to be here this year or next year because I had some serious problems. But all that's in the past. So.
I want to say you look pretty good today. I know that you've been working out, you're getting healthier. You look way better than from what you make it sound. I don't think I've seen you back then, but I seen you now. You look in really good shape.
Well, you got to work at it. You just got to work at it. God gives you a gift to work at it, and that's what I did. I came pretty. Robbie Tyson really knows more about it than a lot of people, but I came pretty close to. At the time when I was in the hospital in 2022, it was so serious that they actually called my daughter and my grandkids up to Atlanta, and they gave me 50-50 chance to really make it and stuff. I had my brother come in, my sister come in, but I made it through it, but it turned out to be very blessed and humbled by it. There's no doubt about it. It just kind of puts when you're in that situation. I've always been very positive and very positive about what I do. I tried to treat people like they would treat me. I try to be honest and upfront with everybody. I don't like to embellish a lot of things. I do talk a lot and embellish a lot, but I think that's the main thing. And God was with me all the time, and so when you. A matter of fact, I even flatlined in recovery, and they brought me back. So
Oh,
that was one of
wow.
the things. Yeah, it was something else, but I'm very blessed to be here. And like I said, the industry is treating me well, and I'm happy with what I'm doing. And I've done some consulting work and some things like that, which I enjoy. And been offered a few things, but I don't know if I can do all this traveling anymore like I did before. It's just a lot of traveling, especially here in Atlanta. Nobody likes going to the Atlanta airport because you never know what you're going to see when you get
Yeah,
there.
it's one of the airports in the country that I think I rather avoid if I can. But it's a big hub. It's a big hub, and you gotta go through it sometimes.
Well, when you
You
got to
know,
leave 3.5 hours from my house to get to the airport because you don't know what the traffic's going to be like. Because I'm on the north side of town and the airport's on the south side. It's different, because I'd rather get there and sit there and in the crown room or someplace and read the paper than sit there and be rushed because you just don't know when security is just a nightmare there, and you never know when they're going to cancel flights or whatever. I've sat in there one time for 14 hours when I could have been better off going home and coming back. But they just kept saying that, we're going to get a plane, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. That's part of traveling now. I think a lot of people go through that a lot, so, but I've
it
been pretty
is.
lucky in my travels, and everything else. It's been a great life. I'm really pleased, where I'm at right now in my life. So I'm really happy, and like I said, if the dealers, the TRIB members, and Dennis and all the board, I'm very proud to have served being a TRIB executive director. It's just a great life for me, and I appreciate everything they have done. And APRo the same way. I was so glad when Charles and I worked together at PTS for probably 6 or 7 years. So he's a great, super guy, great asset to the APRo industry. And there's a lot of great guys on the board. I just go on to name all of them. There's just so many of them. And they're also caring and giving. And that's what I like. I like the idea they do a lot for the customer, do a lot for charity, and I made a point to go to every state show there was if I could, and I had so much fun at those state shows. They're just so much fun, and people appreciate your loyalty and everything else. It's just been a great joy.
Well, I got to tell you, John, I'm glad that you were in the industry. I'm glad that you did the service for the country, and I'm glad that you can celebrate that on the 250th anniversary of a lot of what's going on with the military, and that they want you to speak. It's nice to be able to talk to when you're the first executive director of TRIB, who
Yeah.
lasted in the industry for 14 years, PTS 14 years. You soldier, you're pretty much done just about
Yeah,
anything in the
40,
business
like
that we
almost
can
40
take.
years. I think I started with them I can't remember. I started 84, 85, and I've been in the industry since then. So that's what, 40 years almost. That's 40 years, just
That's
about.
it. That's it.
Yeah, 38 years in the industry, which is good. I still get all the emails from April and everybody else and all this stuff. There's so many things that we went through. There was just when you think back, there was a company that tried to compete with the industry. April was called Rental Dealer News. I never forget them. They tried to compete. They didn't go anywhere. And, everybody's trying to compete, but, we have such loyal and strong people in the industry that are just the RTO, to me, is the best industry, I think, working environment you could be in. It's so, it's so good to people. They treat their customers well, they treat their employees well, and they look after them. And I think that's just terrific what they do. I can think of so many people that's just off of my mind that who's Mike Tissett's the group. I visit his area, and he has such a great group up there, and there's just so many. Cleek out when I go out to. I used to love to go to Missouri. Just a lot of stories out there, and
Those
Michael
are a lot of
Bennett.
great guys out there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the industry's so good. There's a lot of really, really nice guys there, and really genuine, guys that you can trust. And I think that's what's really good about the industry. You can trust people. There's a lot of people you can't. You go to different companies, you hear about it, but you can go and they say something, they're going to stay behind it. There's no doubt about it.
I
It's been
completely
great.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, listen,
And
John,
I
we
agree. And
appreciate
what you're
it.
doing is great too. I think what you're doing is just terrific. I think it's nuts. when I knew you were doing a podcast, when I don't know if Robbie told me or somebody told me that you're doing a podcast, and I said, that's the smartest thing you ever came up with is do a podcast. There's so many podcasts out there, but it's not one for rent to own, and I
No,
think you,
but we're meaning to change that, and I appreciate
yeah,
that, John, because it means a lot coming from you, somebody who's done 40
yeah,
years, 40 plus years
yeah,
in the business and knows about it as much as you do. Guys, I appreciate you guys being here with us. John Blair has been an amazing guest, kind of telling us what's going on from the beginning of APRo all the way, or excuse me, from TRIB to now, and all the intricate details of
yeah,
how and who and what happened in between now and then. I tell you, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the podcast. Hit us up on the email at pete@thertoshowpodcast.com. Feel free to also go on the website. It's www.thertoshowpodcast.com. You can check out there, see who our sponsors are, get into some swag, get a shirt, get a couple of things, get a hat for when you're out there in the world. And remember that you can also go on there and see some of the shenanigans I've been able to get into. You see some of our YouTube videos. We do appreciate those. Also, you can hit us up on social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn,
yeah.
YouTube, where you're going to see this. And John, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you being here with us. And I appreciate the service that you've given us and our country. And I'm going to tell you guys, as always, get your collections low to get your sales high. Have a great one.
That's exactly right.